With 8 races out of the 15 gone, it's time to have a quick look at how everyone's doing so far. As ever, if you prefer it without the Nyoom sound effects, there'll be an alternative link in the description. Williams-Ford. So far so good for Williams, who lead the Constructors' Championship by a country mile, with Reutemann top of the drivers' standings. It's been 3 races now without a win, and failure to score in France for the first time in a season and a half suggests it's not going to be an easy cruise to the finish line for them. Certainly, things are looking very different after 8 races than after the first 2. Fortunately for Williams, everyone else seems to be having problems of their own. After Argentina and Imola, everyone was worried that Piquet was going to run away with it, only for him to end up in the barriers 3 races running. So, for now, the boys in white and green, or red in Carlos's case, are still top dogs, but if they want to stay there, they're going to have to hope that they can reverse the slide, and that the advantage of the turbos on the upcoming power-heavy circuits is negated by the shortcomings of the Ferrari and Renault chassis. Jones has probably already accepted that he's not going to retain his title this year, but he doesn't seem to be in the mood to step back and be a support for Reutemann. Tyrrell-Ford. Tyrrell's slide in recent years has been fairly dramatic. They won a race in 1978 and were regular podium finishes in 1979, and even the relatively slim pickings last year saw them finish 6th overall, with a brace of 4ths for Derek Daly. Eddie Cheever has done his best this year and scored 3 times, although never higher than 5th. The pay drivers, though recruited for the second car, were a predictable disappointment in the first 3 races, but Michele Alboretto's arrival in Imola did improve things. But out-qualifying Cheever at the first time of asking does seem to have been a bit of a false dawn. He's highly rated, and Ken Tyrrell is nothing if not a good judge of driving talent, but as yet there's not much to prove the point. The cars at least are mostly reliable, but just not quick enough to do much more than circulate near the back and hope enough cars drop out to give them a shot at a point or two. Brabham-Ford. The phrase conflict of interest could have been coined to describe the fact that Bernie Ecclestone is both the owner of the Brabham team and the de facto head of F1, though Monsieur Balestre would no doubt beg to differ on that point. The wrangling over what is and isn't legal in terms of skirts and suspensions has cast something of a shadow over the team's performance so far this year, and perhaps it's fortunate for them that Piquet has had a bit of a duff few races, meaning that the dominance everyone else feared after Argentina hasn't come to pass, otherwise there might have been a bit of a revolt. Piquet was leading in both Belgium and Monaco when he went out, and was 2 laps short of winning in France before the downpour that caused the stoppage and saw him ending up 3rd. If not for that, he'd be handily leading the championship, and he and Bernie will be hoping that it's just a blip and he'll be back where they both feel he belongs come the end of the season. As to the other car, it would be difficult to argue that Hector Rebaque is Piquet's equal as a driver, and he's undoubtedly not getting the same attention and support as Nelson, but he's also been somewhat unfortunate, breaking down while running 2nd in Argentina and being punted out of a points position at the second start in France. He has to hope that between the Pemex sponsorship he brings, the 3 points he's already managed, and the fact that he's been unlucky not to get more, will at least keep him in the seat to the end of the year. McLaren-Ford. At the end of 1980, it was starting to look a lot like the McLaren team was circling the drain, unable to even make it onto the podium, with John Watson looking increasingly past it and unable to live with young hotshoe Prost, who then fell out with the team and was immediately moved on to Renault. The merger of Teddy Mayer's McLaren team with the Project 4 F2 team run by Ron Dennis seemed like it might just be rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, except that along with Dennis came Project 4's design team headed by John Barnard. The radical MP4 raised a few eyebrows when announced, and has taken time to start to show its potential, but has now done so with 3rd place in Spain and 2nd in France. Watson's made all the running so far, with Cesaris in the second car having never quite lived up to the glory of out-qualifying Watty in the first race when both were driving the old M29, and Andrea has built up a semi-deserved reputation for crashing instead. In races, he's had 2 collisions, but they were on street circuits, and spun off on his own in Spain, but he's also had a series of accidents in practice, which hasn't helped. Hopefully that's just his youthful exuberance, and he can benefit from the veteran Watson's experience and settle down a bit. ATS Ford. The history of the ATS team has been a bit of a soap opera since they first appeared in the mid-70s, and it shows no sign of abating just yet, with another team manager on his way, and Gunter Schmidt having fallen out with and sacked Jan Lammers, who had the team's best results so far in Argentina, although competition for best finish hasn't been stiff. The new car, the HGS1, has been a bit of a disaster and is yet to qualify in the 4 races it's been used, or even to get through pre-qualifying in Monaco, 2.7 seconds behind even Tombé's Theodore at the top of that session. Schmidt's personality is undoubtedly part of the problem, witness the whole pulling the wing off the car and jumping up and down on it incident, but splitting the operation between West Germany and the UK isn't helping, especially given Schmidt's propensity for assuming everyone else is out to get him. It's a shame, as the motoring-mad Germans could really do with someone they could cheer for in F1, and with no drivers, right at the moment, ATS is the only thing they can wave the flag for, at least until BMW make their promised debut as an engine supplier later in the year. Lotus Ford. Like Tyrrell and McLaren, Lotus have fallen on hard times of late. The loss of JPS sponsorship after the triumphant 1978, and then the engineering dead end of the Lotus 80 in 1979, saw a precipitous fall from the peak that wouldn't be seen again until, well, a year later when Ferrari did pretty much the same thing. Colin Chapman's engineering creativity came up with the Lotus 88 in response to the new regulations, and when all the other teams put aside their differences to get it banned, and then the chief sponsor Essex collapsed, it was perhaps understandable when Colin threw up his hands and pulled the team out of Imola rather than continue with last year's car. Hopefully the return of JPS and the decent performances put in by Mansell and De Angelis will have improved Colin's outlook on the sport, even if the team's only podium so far, Mansell at Zolder, was done in the old car, while both drivers did well in the new car at Monaco, only to end up empty-handed. Both seem fairly well matched in pace, though De Angelis has been far more consistent in scoring points, having been 5th or 6th in all but 2 races he's entered, even if Nigel's the only one who's actually made it onto the podium so far. The venerable team will be hoping that the ship can be stabilised and the upward trajectory continue. Ensign Ford. The small team, based near historic Lichfield in the English Midlands, have done about as well as could be expected so far, and they're unlikely to beat 4th place and fastest lap in Brazil. Mark Sera usually qualified the car in the lower midfield and scored again at Monaco, with another top 10 finish at Imola, but as ever in this business it's the money that counts, and Eliseo Salazar has more of it, thanks to Chilean electrical store DIN. Eliseo's had 2 races and hasn't qualified as highly as Sera so far, but he has qualified and hung on to finish 14th in Spain. So while on the evidence of Spain and France he's not quite at Sera's level, he doesn't seem to be disastrous either. We'll see where he is at the end of the year. Renault. There were some who predicted that with the ban on ground effect, the turbo teams, Renault and Ferrari, would be the ones to beat this year, as those with atmospheric engines no longer had that aerodynamic trick to level the playing field. So far, that doesn't appear to have been the case. Renault won 3 races in 1980, but until Prost's rather fortuitous win at Dijon, the yellow, white and black cars haven't really looked like taking to the top step of the podium. Starting the year with an updated version of last year's car probably hasn't helped, but the reliability has been shocking. Prost has only finished 2 races so far, both of them on the podium, so it's tempting to speculate on how much better they could have been doing. Prost's arrival certainly seems to have rattled the team's established star René Arnoux, who has only failed to finish twice, but managed only a 5th and a 4th place, and failed to qualify at all in Belgium thanks to a combination of reliability problems and the weather. Renault will be hoping that Prost's maiden win on home soil will prove the turning point, and with a series of high-speed tracks coming up, if they can actually start finishing consistently, they could do well. March Ford. It's probably indicative of the way things are going at the team named March but not actually run by the March organisation that John McDonald, who is a customer of March while heading up a team called March Grand Prix, told the press in Brazil that the car was a pile of shit. The March 811 is a clear attempt to copy the Williams FW07 but built of cheaper, heavier materials and engineered without the same care and attention. The hiring of designers Gordon Coppock and Adrian Reynard seems to have improved things a little. The team have got some sponsorship from Guinness and Rizla, and it's noticeable that as soon as the team slimmed down to 1 car, Daly immediately started qualifying for races. Derek and Eliseo were evenly matched in qualifying pace, so it's not a case of getting rid of the dead wood as much as being able to concentrate effort and budget in one place. Fittipaldi Ford. The Brazilian Formula One team, christened as Copersucar, had never been entirely successful, but with double champion Emerson at the wheel, things looked promising at least. But it's looking like 1981 is another step in the team's slide into obscurity, as first Copersucar and then Skull Breweries abandoned the team as sponsors, and there doesn't seem anyone willing to shell out for a title sponsorship this year, now Emerson has retired from driving. And it's showing on the track. Rosberg qualifies in the midfield mostly, except at Monaco, but has only finished twice, and Serra is understandably struggling to fill his boss Emo's big driving shoes. The departure of talented driver Harvey Postlethwaite, thanks to the lack of budget, won't help going forward, and neither will being left in the middle of the unexpected new tyre war. In the current circumstances, the best the team can probably hope for is survival, and maybe the odd point if the stars align. Alfa Romeo. The much-heralded return of the historic Alfa Romeo team to the grid in 1979 has ended up being a bit of a damp squib so far. The 179 chassis proved fast in 1980, usually qualifying in the top 10, but thanks to awful reliability, the best they could manage was 2 fifth-place finishes for Bruno Giacomelli, who also took pole at the last race of the season, so there's definite promise in the car. The death of Patrick Depailler in testing didn't help matters, and even though Bruno helped steady the team, and Mario Andretti seemed convinced enough of the progress they were making to sign up, they entered 1981 with the same car and engine combination as they'd ended 1979 with. Things began reasonably enough, the cars qualifying 6th and 9th in both of the first 2 races, and Andretti scored 3 points at Long Beach, but that's been as good as it's been so far. The 6th and 8th grid slots in Spain were the first time since Brazil that either had qualified in the top 10, and while they seem to mostly have got the reliability side sorted, Spain showed the other problem. After qualifying well, both cars spent the entire race simply circulating in midfield. Now, that's progress of a sort, but the team's high budget carries with it high expectations, especially when one of the drivers was world champion just 3 years ago. Talbot Ligier Martre. The merger of the state-owned Talbot firm into the successful Ligier team, who'd been a surprise package in 1979 and 80, and second in the standings last year, must have seemed a great idea on the face of it, but whether it's the extra layers of management or the distraction of Jean-Pierre Jabouille's difficulties in recovering from his accident last year, it's been a stuttering start to 1981, though the long-serving Jacques Lafitte has dragged the team back to the sharp end of the field in recent races, with podium finishes in Belgium, Monaco and Spain. Though their performance on home tarmac in Dijon was slightly concerning for the rest of the season, as despite the power of the V12 Matra engine, neither Lafitte nor new recruit Tombe could get much out of the JS17. With more power circuits to come, it might prove to be a tricky second half of the season. Hopefully, at least, the arrival of Patrick Tombe, who's been pulling up trees at Theodore, will mean Jolly Jacques isn't carrying the whole enterprise. Ferrari. Well, 2 wins and 4 more points finishes is already a vast improvement on 1980, not that that's saying a lot. The shortcomings of the 126CK chassis are obvious, but the Ferrari turbo engine seems to have had a much more trouble-free development than its Renault counterpart, which took 18 races to score, 22 to take pole, and 27 to win. Despite Villeneuve's popular pole position at Imola, his win at Monaco next time out was still something of a surprise, partly because the Ferraris hadn't been particularly impressive even at the high-speed Imola track, and partly because the car's well-documented handling difficulties should have meant Villeneuve had had his work cut out just to keep it on the tarmac. And yes, it was Piquet stuffing it in the barrier and Jones's engine playing up that handed him the win, but still. And Jarama wasn't much more likely as a Ferrari win venue either, so Villeneuve has already guaranteed himself folk hero status among the Tifosi. The number 28 car has been more problematic though. Didier Pironi's had a rapid rise through F1 from Tyrrell to Ligier to Ferrari, but seems to be struggling more with the car and has been frankly demolished by Gilles in qualifying so far. Ferrari can be a difficult environment to come into, and things don't get any easier if you aren't immediately on the pace, so it's inevitable that there were rumours of Ferrari wanting to sign a star like Piquet or Jones for 1982. Those have been officially scotched, but if Pironi's form doesn't improve, that might change. Arrows Ford. The little British team surprised everyone with Patrase's pole position at the opening round in Long Beach, and podiums at Rio and Imola proved that it wasn't a fluke, the year-old A3 chassis having apparently aged better than some of the others of a similar vintage. Things haven't quite lived up to that early promise. Patrase's fourth place on the grid in Belgium never came to anything, of course, but nonetheless it's only in the last couple of races he's qualified outside the top 10, and the team will be hoping that's just a blip and he can get back up the grid, though the car may suffer more from the nature of the circuits going forwards. In the second car, Siegfried Stohr has had more difficulties, understandably given his relative lack of experience as he's risen rapidly through the lower formulae, and he's been deeply affected by the accident in Belgium, even though it was not his fault and no lasting harm was done. A great deal of performance in racing is confidence, and Siggy seems to have been rather shaken by both Zolder and the gulf in performance between him and Patrese. Osella Ford. The little Italian team have had an awful start to their second year in the category, with the injuries to Miguel Angel Guerra after qualifying for the first time at Imola, followed by the death of team mechanic Giovanni Amadeo at the next race in Belgium. Piercarlo Ginzani brought his car home 12th at Zolder to help rally the team, but that's been the only finish so far out of just 4 qualifications. It's tough going at this end of the grid, and there's lots of competition for those last few slots. There are rumours that relations between Enzo Osella and Beppe Gabbiani are somewhat strained, with Beppe now effectively lead driver but not able to qualify, even as the team's sole effort in France, and despite continued funding by Denim Aftershave, the withdrawal of funding from the Italian state through the MS Tobacco brand has left a big hole in their finances, and it's difficult to see where any improvement will come from. Theodore Ford. Teddy Yip's Hong Kong registered team are not quite completely starting from scratch given his previous history in the sport and taking over Shadow towards the end of 1980, but nonetheless Tony Southgate's TYO1 chassis scored a point on its first time out, proving that looks aren't everything. Patrick Tambay was regarded by many in F1 as having fluffed his big chance a few years previously, and while he'd done well enough in Can-Am racing, he hadn't really shone in the admittedly thankless role of James Hunt's teammate at McLaren in 1978 and 79. But he drove the Theodore really well early on in 1981, and with the exception of Belgium, he usually qualified solidly in the middle of the pack. He'll be a loss to the team, but they'll be hoping that Mark Seurer, who has been similarly outperforming expectations at Ensign, will be able to continue the team's promising results. 21st on the grid in France wasn't quite as good, but it was all a bit last minute, and he still brought the car home 12th, so it's far from a disaster, and he can be expected to improve as the season progresses. Tolman Hart. An object lesson in the fact that you can't necessarily just convert a dominant F2 team to an F1 operation with immediate success. And to his credit, team boss Alex Hawkridge always knew it would be a struggle and would have preferred a couple more years to prepare, but was hoping to benefit from coming in on the FISA side of the ongoing political disputes and getting in on the ground floor with their own exclusive turbo engine. The TG181 chassis, though, is bulky and hugely overweight, while the Hart engines are underpowered despite their turbochargers. They are making slow progress, admittedly from a long way back, and Henton was unlucky not to sneak onto the back of the grid in France, but the cars seem sometimes to spend as much of their time being repaired as they do running. It's going to be a longer-term project to shape the team into anything approaching competitiveness, but only if they can survive financially until then.